The stock market is currently testing the waters of a very interesting name, Tempus AI, which could be at the forefront of an intersection between healthcare, which is not the most innovative industry, and of course, artificial intelligence to revolutionize how we drive patient outcomes and make advances in healthcare. Now, the first question I had on my mind when Tempus AI came across my desk, are they riding on the AI bandwagon? And initially, I realized they actually changed their name to Tempus AI in January of 2023, just a few weeks after ChatGPT was released by OpenAI, and LLMs took the world by storm because the average consumer could actually see what all of this behind the scenes AI could really do. But upon further inspection, it actually turns out that Tempus AI were founded in 2015, and they have been using artificial intelligence and machine learning from the ground up. So this is actually a genuine AI company that may have some very powerful, innovative assets. Here's the CEO and founder, Eric Lefkowski, on CNBC, explaining exactly what the business does and how they incorporate artificial intelligence.
In my case, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer almost 10 years ago, and I was just perplexed at how little data was a part of her care. I used to say we were giving truck drivers picking up pallets of water bottles more technology and more tools than we give physicians, which is just maddening. And so we set out to try to bring the benefits of artificial intelligence and technology to diagnostics by essentially contextualizing a laboratory test result around the patient for whom it was ordered. And that technology just began to take off. People began to order the tests that we were offering through the genomic sequencing we were doing of cancer patients. The business began to grow. We began to hire people, and here we are 8 years later.
So now it's considered an AI company. But before, would have you thought about it as an AI company or a machine learning company or
well,
what?
It's a great question. I mean, we've been focused on machine learning and big data and technology and algorithms and models since our inception. So, back then, 8.5 years ago, it was natural language processing and optical character recognition and all kinds of, large machine learning models. Obviously, as AI has evolved, especially with large language models, the focus of the business and our ability to use AI has changed. But we've been thinking about AI in diagnostics.
But has something, but the advent, if you will, of generative AI, has that completely and fundamentally shifted your business, or is it actually not that different than what it was before before ChatGPT was revealed?
I think it's a natural evolution. I mean, we filed it's interesting, we filed a patent for a technology called Tempus AI, which is basically a doctor can talk to a laboratory test result and ask it any question, and eventually a patient, and it'll give you an answer. And so that technology is essentially like ChatGPT for a laboratory test result.
Hey everybody, I hope you derive a lot of insight from the presentation that you're about to watch on Tempus AI. Just to say, this was recorded on Monday, the 20th of January. It's now the 27th of January, and the share price has moved a lot since I have spoken about it. Now, the key part of the thesis for Tempus AI wasn't valuation. It's not a stock that you're buying because it's egregiously undervalued. It's a stock that has huge business potential in the fields linking healthcare and AI, but the shares move. They really move. And on Tuesday, it was announced their Olivier platform, which is a custom AI personalized healthcare platform that I think has the potential to do really well. Anyway, just be aware that some of the ratios used in this video, and I've captioned where it's appropriate, are slightly different just because when I was making the video, share price was $35. It's currently $54. Who knows, by the time this video is up, it could be at $70 or right back down at 35. So you never know. Just be careful with the volatility on this one is what I'll say. Also, these videos take a lot of time and energy, and 86% of people on the channel are not subscribed. If you're finding value in my content, I would really appreciate you giving me a subscription. My editing team and I work very hard on this channel, and it will encourage us to produce more high quality deep dives like this one in the future. Without further ado, enjoy the video. So obviously he would clarify on CNBC that they are an AI business, but there are many examples from prior interviews where they've been talking about AI in depth and clarifying that this is what they do from the ground up. much earlier than when ChatGPT was released. For example, he talks about artificial intelligence and their own models in 2020 when the company was still in its infancy and only generating a couple of $100 million annually in total revenue.
Cloud computing and all these other AI tools that we built allow us to basically go into the medical record and rip out these key data attributes at scale.
So they're an AI company and they're in healthcare, right? But what exactly do they do? Well, they have two main business segments. They have their genomics and then they have their data and services. And the way I like to think about it is their genomics is their sort of micro. A doctor would use their genomics to send across an individual's DNA sample, cells, potential imaging. Now, Tempus AI specialize in oncology, so cancer, but they've since expanded to other types of illness, including neurodegenerative diseases, heart disease, all types of infectious diseases. They're rapidly expanding. So it's disease agnostic, and it's an interesting way to play it because if you want innovation in the sort of pharmaceutical healthcare industry, you typically have to go for some crazy biotech, which, like, let's be honest, unless you're a specialist, is very difficult to understand. And they have a crazy skew in risk reward profile where, yes, if the company actually gets their product approved, they make a boatload of revenue. A lot of the time they don't, and they're constantly burning money, issuing more and more shares. But with Tempus AI, it's agnostic to all of that, and it's an AI purpose platform that actually trains on all of the data. So going back to what I was saying, you've got their genomics business, right? And a doctor will send across a sample, both of DNA and potentially of the tumor. So they work on both genomic and cellular data in order to sort of sequence that DNA and link the genetics of a patient to the behavior of the tumor or the disease or whatever it happens to be in order to drive personalized outcomes. Because, you know, people have different types of cancers and chemo A might work better for some people, chemo B might work better for others. In other cases, radiotherapy might be better. You know, there's different types of drugs that can be used within chemotherapy that do all kinds of different things. And that is what Tempus AI are targeting. So they have this whole genomics business, but they also have the data and services business. Now, what is very interesting is, number one, the genomics business gives them a whole load of data for this data and services business, but actually they partner with so many hospitals across the United States in order to collect data. Now, this is a very key point of their business, right? In the US, and actually in the vast majority of even economically developed countries, there is not a centralized database for healthcare. It's incredibly fragmented. Obviously in the US, you know, you have hospitals under Medicare, Medicaid, you've got a whole load of private hospitals, and the system is very messy, right? In the UK, we have a national healthcare system, but unfortunately, at least the way it works for now, is that a hospital in Bristol won't talk and share data to a hospital in Glasgow. And whilst there's a sort of nationalised service, which I can use anywhere in the country, actually they're not talking to each other in terms of data. And it's the same in many countries across the world. What that unfortunately means is there is not a centralised place for this data. And that's effectively what Tempus AI have built. So they've partnered with many hospitals where they're not even doing genomics, but they're doing effectively just, here you can have all of our research, you know, you can do some genomic sequencing and provide us with some free analysis, and then Tempus AI aggregate all of that data and they train it on their artificial intelligence in order to provide better and better outcomes for patients. So that's what the data and services business sort of entails. That's the engine of it. But the genomics obviously helps them gather new data, and then they can put that into the data and services business and the AI can analyze it. So the genomics is micro, sort of patient by patient, and then the data and services business, what they do is effectively, let's say a company wants to discover a pattern between this type of experimental cancer drug and how it would work and how different patients react to it. This is what the data and services business will predict because it's trained on all of this data. And that is what makes Tempus AI incredibly powerful, because obviously there are other companies out there with very, very good AI. It's very promising that Tempus AI was artificial intelligence from the ground up. But the key thing is that it's trained on very specific data. And that's what makes it incredibly powerful in this niche. And all of a sudden, then you get this very high barriers to entry, because this data that the hospitals are giving to Tempus AI, they've had to build up an extensive network of partners in order to gather all of the data that they have. And they've got this massive database to a point where it's 20 times larger than the largest public database, the Cancer Genome Atlas. So they've effectively got all of this data. As I said, if a new company were to come along, it's very difficult for them to build up such a network, because these hospitals need an incentive to give Tempus AI that data. And now that Tempus AI have all these partnerships with hospitals, they can generate a significant ROI on that data for the hospitals that are giving them that data. And that's the beauty of it, is like, let's say you had a company with more powerful AI, right? You might say Palantir has more powerful AI than Tempus AI, which is almost guaranteed to be true. But the thing is that whilst Palantir is very broad and it's been trained off a huge, broad data set, Tempus AI has been trained extensively on a very specialized healthcare data set. And the more data that you input into that, the smarter the AI gets, the better decisions that it can derive from all of that data, and thus the more useful Tempus AI becomes. So it's effectively a spiral. It's like, for example, you might have someone who is in the 99th percentile of linguistics and someone who's in the 90th percentile of linguistics. But if that person in the 90th percentile of linguistics has grown up speaking Mandarin Chinese and is studying Mandarin Chinese all their life, if someone who's in the 99th percentile grew up in the United States and started learning Mandarin Chinese at age 21, they will never get as good at Mandarin Chinese as that person in the 90th percentile, just because they have been trained natively on that data or on that language data, right? So that's effectively what Tempus AI do. And they have crazy use cases with regards to what they can do for companies. Now, on the data and services side, they already work with 19 out of 20 of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, which actually is showing you that they are driving a lot of value. The way that they do this, and I'll leave the CEO to explain, is as well as just providing general sort of insights into the ways they could potentially create new drugs, also once they've got that in motion, the inferences that the AI is making is significantly helping them to determine if a drug should move across the phases of clinical trials, which is a huge advantage for pharmaceutical companies using Tempus AI, because as we know, phase 1 might be a couple of million and take a few months. Phase 2, that might cost them 5 million and take even longer. But phase 3, very few clinical trials in phase 3 cost less than 10 to 20 million. And this is what he had to say about, in the long run, Tempus AI's goal of helping pharmaceutical companies get a higher ROI from drug discovery to actually getting it FDA approved and on the market, generating them monetary revenue.
I'm gonna get yelled at by Jim afterwards, but I'm 100% convinced that we're some number of years away. I don't know what that is, maybe 5 or 10, that the concept of a failed phase 3 will be impossible. Like literally, it's like not like you'll ask people, you'll say like there was a failed phase 3, and they'll be like, wow, that can't happen. Like that's literally impossible. And so that's the world we're about to enter, where we will be able to design phase 2s and understand phase 2s in a way that you couldn't run a phase 3 unless you just disregarded all data. Like we're going to tell you what part of the population you need to have at a molecular level to have a successful phase 3. And in a world where phase 3s never fail, which is coming very soon, I think it's profound. I think and in a world where phase 2s, the success rate goes from 40% to probably 70%, 80%. So like the whole R&D disaster is about to get realigned. And that's because today, when people make drugs, they basically they go from like a very small biological and chemical understanding to like the general population, and they disregard all data in between. And the data now is rich enough to understand exactly at a molecular level who's responding and who's not responding and why. And understanding that would then allow you to be like, wait a minute, how should I proceed?
Also, because of Tempus AI's network, they can also provide pharmaceutical companies, and they can also link patients and pharmaceutical companies together to engage in these clinical trials, which is a very powerful network, because obviously when someone is sick, they will try a lot of experimental things to help themselves get better. And yeah, the way that this works, again, there's just no central system for linking pharmaceutical companies to patients in such a powerful way. So Tempus can suggest through doctors, your patient can go on this clinical trial. It adds value to the patient because you never know, that experimental drug might drive significant improvement in quality of life and potentially help them to get rid of their disease and live a healthy life. And obviously for the pharmaceutical company, it gives them the patients that they are really trying to target with that specific niche of a drug. This is, again, incredibly powerful network economics. So it's a very exciting business model, and it makes a lot of sense because, unfortunately, the gap between life and health life, particularly in developed countries, is widening. What I mean by that is, sort of 150 years ago, in developed countries, a lot of people were dying from infectious diseases very quickly, or having heart attacks, but because medicine has improved, it's keeping people alive for longer. But unfortunately, a lot of those people are sort of in a state of limbo where they're not healthy and living their life to the absolute full, but they are still alive. And what that means is that there's huge demand for treating patients. That pattern is only going to continue. For example, in the United States, the population of age 65 and over is increasing. And as we know, in other places like Europe and Japan, the population pyramid is even more skewed, where you've got people in that age bracket that are most at risk of serious disease being more and more prevalent. And this is where the total addressable market for Tempus will keep increasing. But even based on today's standards, the massively powerful thing about Tempus is they are disease agnostic. Yes, they're focusing on oncology, but because their AI is trained on all types of healthcare data, it's getting more and more powerful in different areas of disease. So I wanted to break down their business by segment just a little bit. So this is quarterly. In the last few quarters, you can see their total revenue in purple. You've got the data segment in blue, and you've got the genomics segment in orange. Now, the thing is like Tempus, and this is going to be a big part of the video, they're still operating at a loss. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but they're one of these companies that is very aggressive in getting their mission sorted. I have no doubt in my mind they're literally incredibly focused on adding value first to save as many lives as possible. And they have a very altruistic founder CEO who is actually the founder CEO of Groupon and many other businesses as well, but Groupon most famously. And his wife got diagnosed with cancer 10 years ago. And since he was just baffled by how little actual data input and customized treatment went into his wife's care post-diagnosis. And this is why Tempus AI was founded. So they're incredibly focused on the mission at hand. And I don't have any doubt about management in that department, but they are still loss-making. If we go back to the segments of their business, one saving grace, you can see here that the data and services revenue is growing very fast. So this is from last quarter, from 39.2 million to 64.5. And actually I've got the growth rates here too. So again, you've got data and services in blue. That accelerated to 64%, whilst the genomics business is growing at 20.3%. I think the thing is about data and services is you can just grow that much more exponentially. Like when, there's only, for example, I think Tempus said they're already working with over half of cancer patients in the United States. And like with that, there's only so many more people that are going to get diagnosed and re-diagnosed each year. There's only so many like individual personal tailoring you can do. But the total addressable market on that is absolutely huge. But there's an infinitely higher total addressable market with what you can do with that data. And of course, it's getting more powerful all the time, which drives a higher ROI for the pharma companies that subscribe to the platform. But the reason that that's important is obviously with the data and services, it sort of operates much more as an AI sort of SaaS-esque kind of platform. Whilst the genomics, you've obviously got to sequence that, and Tempus do all of the sequencing themselves. They have their own labs. They've got 3 or 4 across America, and that helps them to sort of take control of the whole chain and make sure that the data is accurate and they're, complying with everything they need to comply to. So I like that. They are in control of that whole entire process. But the data and services gross margin is expanding a lot. And yeah, it's now at nearly 80%. So whilst they are still making a loss, and you can see here for at least this quarter compared to the quarter last year, their net loss widened quite a lot, but their adjusted EBITDA margin is certainly less negative than it was. So yeah, on the one hand, at least for this last quarter, they had a net loss of 76 million on 180 million. That net loss margin is very wide. But on the other hand, they are starting to drive operating leverage, particularly when they've got a data and services business growing incredibly quickly with a much higher gross margin. What is very impressive is when you look at overall revenues, they have this sort of period where, they grew 26.1% in the first quarter and then 25%, but that's actually starting to tick up and reaccelerate. They've just reported their full year earnings of 693 million, which is actually 35% year-on-year growth. So a reacceleration from last quarter's 33% as well. So they are growing incredibly quickly, and that 35% overall is with data and services growing 45%. So a lot of value there, and genomics growing 30% as well. Very recently, Tempus also spoke at JP Morgan, and they said that their overall sort of core growth on the Tempus platform for 2025 was to be around 30%. That's what they're guiding for. So it's really promising to see sustained growth of 30% per year. Hopefully this will help them to drive operating leverage and make a profit. They're also forecasting adjusted EBITDA profitability for 2025.
The consolidated business. So we reforecasted guidance at 1.23 billion of revenue, which would actually be north of the high end of our historic range. And then we've told the world we expect to be adjusted EBITDA and free cash flow positive in 2025. So, which is a super exciting milestone for us. We'll turn 10 this year, and to build a business that's growing at our core business in 2025 is expected to grow about 30%, Ambry a bit less, but it's really nice to see a business that's growing 25-30%.
Now, what you'll notice in the segment that I've just played is they are acquiring a company, and it's quite a big acquisition called Ambry Genetics. Now, what Ambry do is they basically analyze someone's genetic material to see what at risk they are for certain genetic diseases, which is great because Tempus can incorporate all of this data into their ecosystem. And I should mention, maybe it's a little bit of a belated point, but when Tempus are sort of sharing this, they're not sharing data, they're sharing insights from data. So data remains confidential within the Tempus platform. They are just sharing insights, trends, and patterns within that data. So I just want to make that clear. They're not a data sales company. They're a healthcare insights company. Anyway, what Ambry do is they analyze your genetic material and see what at risk you are for certain diseases. Now, this makes a lot of sense for Tempus to acquire them. Again, it's one of those things where it's an expensive acquisition for them to make, 600 million. They're also issuing another 225 million of equity for this acquisition. So that effectively dilute existing shareholders by almost 5%, given the market cap is round about 5 billion right now. So this is what I mean about Tempus being aggressive is I'm not going to go into deep finances. You can see that they're still loss making, as I discussed. Yeah, they've clearly got a very powerful mission that's driving considerable value in the healthcare market. One thing that is interesting is they're saying Ambry, they said this in their Q3 results, Ambry are growing 25% to 300 million in revenue for FY24. Now, if we have a look at those numbers, and they forecasted for FY25 1.23 billion, okay, that's fair enough. That's 24% growth. They said 25, but it's 24% growth on the sum of Ambry's 300 million and on Tempus's actual result of 693 million. You get 24%, but they're saying the combined is 25, fair, but Tempus is growing north of that. In order for Ambry, then if Tempus is say growing at 28, so they're saying Tempus is growing closer to 30, which by my implication, that would mean roughly 28%. But in order to then get to that 1.23, it means that Ambry is slowing down to 14% from 25. So if Ambry grew 14 on 300 and Tempus grew 28 on 693, that would make revenues of 1.23 billion. That's effectively what I'm saying. So it seems that they're either forecasting a significant slowdown in Ambry, or let's say if Ambry grew 20 and Tempus grew 25, that would then also be slightly over or round about the 1.23 billion mark. So it's still very good growth overall. Maybe it's just going to take them a while to synergize Ambry and Tempus together. That might be the thing. But yeah, it's very difficult to know. As I said, I think fundamentally this company really, really believes in their mission. They've got their same CFO from Groupon as well. Groupon is a company that had massive early success with, selling coupons and discounts, and unfortunately ended up growing too quickly, expanding, and then revenue stagnated and they went public, and you can see the share price fell massively. I think Tempus is a business that is clearly deriving significant value, but what I want to make sure is that organic growth remains and they don't just keep bolting on like crazy acquisitions when they're not adding value. The CEO is clearly a very smart guy and he has very deep-rooted principles as to why he wants to make this company work. And I mean, what you can also say is that there were many companies before that have preceded this that for years and years and years and years added huge amounts of value and did not make a profit. 3 massive examples that have since had huge success: Palantir, Tesla, and Uber. And I was both a relatively big investor in Palantir and in Uber before, when Palantir, everyone was saying they hadn't made a net profit in 20 years. They were actually burning through a lot of cash. It wasn't just like they're making net profit of 0. They were burning through a lot of net profit and cash flow. And then all of a sudden they came through to fruition and you had huge multiple and share price expansion. And it's the same thing with Uber. Uber never made a profit. And then all of a sudden that leverage worked in their favor. And, they were being very aggressive in companies that they're acquiring and things that they were doing. But they managed to synergize everything together and effectively become the platform of logistics and delivery and rideshare and all these kind of things. And then the share price obviously followed. It roughly tripled and they got into the S&P 500 and everything worked out much better for Uber investors. So it's not that I'm against, Tempus are not making a profit. Yeah, and also, so they did mention that they are forecasted to hit EBITDA profitability in 2025. It's worth bearing in mind that Ambry was already generating 40 million of EBITDA for 2024. So that will actually help them. And Ambry was a private company up to this point. I also just want to see their balance sheet to make sure that they are not like taking on a whole load more debt, because as I said, Tempus AI are very leveraged. So you can expect probably more share dilution in Tempus. They need to kind of pay a lot of their borrowing down. For the moment, it looks pretty sustainable. But again, I don't have the most amount of data because they've only been public for 2 quarters. There's not a sort of full year filing there. There's only their S1 and then, of course, this JP Morgan conference. So that is something we're going to have to see. But I'm just saying, of course, a lot of companies fail because they overspend. But a lot of companies that have an incredibly powerful, unique product like Tesla and Palantir and Uber, they were all in the same position and they had a lot of market doubters. And then when they proved they could consistently generate net profit or cash flow, that's when the shares has a significant uplift. And maybe we'll get the same thing with Tempus. So the way that I will play this is I will not go guns blazing and diving in completely. Now, the shares have gone down a little bit from their IPO and they're not trading at ridiculously high levels. It's almost pointless to try and build an accurate DCF for Tempus at this stage. But you can see they're currently trading on 16 times gross profit, and that's also trailing because analysts don't tend to forecast gross profit so much. So I have to use trailing gross profit. But what's that going to be in terms of forward gross profit? 13. And with gross margin expansion as well, it's quite a reasonable multiple for a company that's growing at 30% per year and seems to be's knees with artificial intelligence in an industry that really, really needs it. The other thing is, as the data and services business grows, I think that sales and marketing as a percentage of revenue will certainly come down. I haven't been able to extrapolate out sales and marketing for the minute because actually they include that in G&A as well. But I imagine because they're already working with the vast majority of big pharma firms and they can see the value generated by Tempus, they're not spending much on sales and marketing in that department. They're much more spending the sales and marketing in genomics to sort of target individual hospitals and individual patients, etc. So I imagine that the sales and marketing is probably already quite low. It depends on how much they can sort of generate operational efficiency by cutting that. Maybe it is quite low considering they lump together SG&A. However, in fact, it's probably quite high, because if you look at it, that's over half of total revenue for the 3 months ended September 2024. So maybe there's a lot of operational efficiency to drive there as well. Anyway, it's an early bet and it's a high risk bet. 13 times sort of forward gross, or it's almost 13 times trailing gross, because they're about to report 13 times gross profit. Keep an eye out for the earnings at the start of February. And my point being is, like, this is a very volatile stock. It might be one of those companies where they continue to be loss-making for longer than they anticipate, and a lot of their sort of EBITDA optimism may be coming from the acquisition, because as I said, they were generating 40 million of EBITDA on 300 million of revenue. So they've actually got a positive EBITDA margin of over 10%. So they may be having some optimism on that. And I just think that the whole culture of the management is they want to attack the mission first before worrying about net profitability.
In my case, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer almost 10 years ago, and I was just perplexed at how little data was a part of her care. I used to say we were giving truck drivers picking up pallets of water bottles more technology and more tools than we give physicians.
That works for companies going after big goals, and Tempus AI is massive. The total addressable market for this is huge, as I said, because they're expanding into so many different types of areas and collecting all of that healthcare data, and the insights that they generate will only be more and more powerful on an AI that is very, very specifically trained for that. The only thing that could happen, and it would be a good thing for shareholders, is a company with more powerful AI than Tempus ends up acquiring them. So then they've got that data to be trained on that AI, and that's the way to go. And maybe that will happen. Like maybe Google will acquire them because Google and Alphabet as a fund actually holds Tempus. So maybe that will go ahead. But yeah, I think that actually the barriers to entry in terms of collecting regular data and making sure that you're trusted by regulatory bodies and building up that network of hospitals, that minimizes the risk of another company just launching in and generating superior AI models, because these are AI models trained on a niche and that data is very difficult to obtain. It's not like you have like an AI model, you're a small company, let's say, and you have an AI model which helps predict the weather. It aggregates all that data. Of course, there's no way of hiding weather data. That's very, very public data. And a company like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Palantir can come along and they can generate a superior AI model for that weather. But number one, the data is incredibly difficult to obtain from all these healthcare professionals because it's very secretive and it has to be handled in certain ways. Tempus has already been trained on that data, which then means that there's a high probability that it will receive more data from the hospitals. And also number three, this data is incredibly valuable because it's life-saving. So that's Tempus AI. It's a very, very interesting business. It's one that I will be making an investment in, but this is very, very high risk. Please don't assume that it's all plain sailing, because they've got a lot of things to work out financially, and we'll get more color on that once they go through their Q4 results and report for the full year. And yeah, also they're growing very fast, but if that growth rate slows down whilst they're in still like an equity diluting stage and a massive acquisition stage, then the company could very easily hit some massive hurdles. So that's my conclusion. I'm very impressed. I do think they're the real deal and they're adding a lot of value. But I would definitely say this is a company where you don't want to put all of your investment that you want to invest in the company into it in one stage. I think you want to sort of slowly get into it. And also, yeah, it's not for the faint-hearted. So please don't take this as investment advice. It's purely my research to help you make your own investment decisions. Thank you very much for watching.